Hello and welcome to the first in a series of videos delving into the turbulent world of Total War Three Kingdoms, a time of legendary warlords, brotherhood and betrayal. As the Han dynasty falls and war erupts across China once again, the next Total War gives you the opportunity to reshape the country to match your own ambitions. To do that, you'll want to understand what drives this conflict at its heart. Who are the major players? What do they want? And in which of them can you afford to trust? We'll get to all of that, but first, let's find out a little more about the game's new setting. It's a first for Total War.
The main things that distinguish this from previous titles is China. You know, we've not done China before, we've not been to China before, and it's such an amazingly beautiful and diverse landscape. But from the environment perspective, it's you know, new challenge. Lots of diverse kind of subclimates, you know, visually distinct from each other, and also the period, this character-rich period is very unique for us. Normally we deal with conflict, nation versus nation. Here it's one nation, one country, segmented, broken apart into warring factions. But essentially it's very similar to Shogun. But with such a much stronger focus on these characters, you know, that's what kind of sets this apart from previous games.
Well, that and the sheer scale of the warfare involved. The Total War series, as the name would suggest, has always focused on those points in human history in which conflict has been at its most extreme. And okay, there's now Warhammer as well, but Creative Assembly have typically been attracted to the largest conflicts of our past, and this next game is taking on a conflict that dwarfs almost every other.
China itself and that conflict, Three Kingdoms conflict, is one of the most interesting and most bloody conflict in history. So somewhere between 30 and 45 million people died over the course of it, making it one of the most bloody conflicts in history and definitely the most bloody conflict in the ancient world. And when you're making a Total War game, you want a game that has a pretty big canvas for death on a grand scale, so that's perfect for us.
Although the game's campaign is guided by historical events, the developers are also looking to one of China's most renowned novels to shape much of the world they're creating here. That novel is something like 800,000 words long, so there's plenty to draw upon. I'm of course talking about the literary epic Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
We have our two sort of primary sources for Three Kingdoms. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, written in the 14th century, which is a sort of a dramatised account of the record of the Three Kingdoms, which was the very hard history written at or just after the time, containing all of that dense detail that we love when it comes to making a historical game, like food and resources and famine numbers and population indexes and that kind of thing, and sort of dramatise them in the same way that Shakespeare might have dramatised one of the Richard III or something like that.
As your campaign begins, you'll find ancient China in chaos and the old imperial capital reduced to little more than rubble and ashes. The tyrant, Dong Zhuo, claimed much of the old emperor's power for himself and cared little for those who stood in his way, has created many enemies for himself, some of which joined forces in the hopes of deposing him. They were not successful. It's at this point that you enter the fray, but how much freedom will you have to change history? Do you need to reenact that story once told by the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or can you take matters into your own hands entirely?
Well, we maintain that we are a sandbox. The Total War sandbox is an expected part of the franchise, and we don't like to deviate from that. But what we do, we tend to provide a snapshot of history, and that's what the starting position is. It's based very much on the way things were at the time, and then at that point, once the player is sort of let loose in the world, we let them carve their own path. And now, because of the historical events, and because it is based in part on the fictionalized version of those historical events, we do punctuate this with narrative moments that are drawn from the history, and the player is sort of allowed to choose to pursue these or to ignore them sort of at their will. So for example, you might have a dilemma that you encounter, and then one option will be sort of as it was told, which is more like the actuality, or you can go against that grain and then just sort of carve your own path. But still, just to reiterate, it is largely the Total War sandbox, and you can choose to ignore history in its entirety and do your own thing.
No matter what path you choose to take in Total War Three Kingdoms, this campaign, more than ever, is driven by the fantastic characters who exist within it. If you don't know who Lu Bu is yet, don't worry, you will learn to fear that name just like the rest of us. In the next episode of this video series, we'll be getting to know some of the most important characters in the Three Kingdoms a little better, including arguably the three most influential generals of their era, Liu Bei, Sun Jian, and the ever-cunning Cao Cao.